Okay, so I am back in the shop at the moment. Going to show you a little bit about how I replace the comb that we take out of our cutouts into frames so it can then go in a beehive. So this here is a beehive. This is a 5-frame beehive, what we call typically a nucleus colony. It is 5 frames. I keep my bees in smaller colonies because I have a lot more of them in a smaller space, and it's easier to manage them when they're a smaller size. It's also easier to keep more colonies in a smaller place when the size of the colony is smaller. They need less resources, they need less space, and I also sell bees. So this is the typical size that we would sell bees in what we call that nucleus colony. So that's how I keep them in my space, because I have upwards of 100 hives every year going into winter. This year I'm a little bit light at that, I'm somewhere about 70. But again, it's just much easier for me to manage them all by myself and manage them in an urban environment like Philadelphia. And we'll see a little bit of that as we get on to the video. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take the comb that we removed from our cutout and we're going to put it into frames. You can see a little bit of variation in this, some heavier, thicker comb over here, some much thinner stuff you can kind of see through. And in this piece of comb here, we can actually see right there, that is pollen that's stored inside of these cells. These are called cells. These cells are drawn, meaning when they make them, they draw them on a downward angle, so that way when they store nectar and pollen and everything in them, nothing runs out. So we're going to take this piece I'm not going to put in because it's kind of a smaller piece, but what we're going to do is we're going to put that into this frame. So I'm going to bring out some of what I have here. I have some nice broad pieces. This is actually another great piece. On this side you can see in the center there it's loaded with pollen, which is good because the bees need that. So we're going to take this and transfer it into our frame. Now, the important part about this, when I transfer this into a frame, I got to make sure that it's the proper orientation, meaning that the cells that are drawn downward remain drawn downward, or the bees can't use this. It'll just be something that they tear down and reconfigure. And at this time of the year, I can't have that happen. So what we're going to do with this is, as you can see, it's kind of a funky shape. This was in an eave, and they built it down and into the space, and you'll see that more in the coming pieces. So I have to trim this piece down to fit in this frame. So let me show you how I do that. Let me bring it down here. Give it a little bit of tilt on my tripod here. Hopefully my stuff doesn't fall over. That should probably do it. So again, this piece is a little bit oblong. So I'm going to take this right off the get-go, and I'm just going to square off the bottom of it. Cut that piece. Believe it or not, this is the same thing as this. This is just dirty from the bees walking all over it, from them using it. But when we render this or clean this wax, it will turn into this nice, beautiful yellow beeswax color that we're all used to seeing in candles. Beeswax candles are the cleanest burning candles. They also burn the longest, and they actually clean the air when they burn. So I make a lot of candles because I get a lot of this wax and I get a lot of these extra pieces that I don't have any use for. So again, the orientation is important. This is the way this has to be in the frame. This top bar of the frame is the top. So what I'm going to do is I lay my comb down in the orientation I know it's needed, and I just rest my frame right on top of it. Now, because I squared that edge off here, that's going to make life a whole lot easier for me when transferring this. It's probably better back where it was. When I'm transferring this into the frame. So I just set it right on top, like I said, and I use the frame as my guide and just cut along the frame, remove the excess piece, set this down, and bada bing, bada boom. That's how I transfer this wax into frames. Now, if you cut this nice and tight like that, I don't need anything to support it. Oftentimes what we will do with a comb is we'll just put a couple of rubber bands on it just to make sure that it doesn't go anywhere. So I can take that first piece that we saw, and I have a bit of remaining space in this frame, and I'll take that, and again, I'm going to square up that bottom, just give it a nice clean cut, set it on my countertop here, set my rest of my frame on top, give it a cut, and again, that fits in there nicely, that I barely need any support with it. I am going to put a rubber band in there just to make sure that it doesn't go anywhere while the bees are using it. And eventually the bees will draw wax and completely support this inside of the frame by connecting wax to the frame itself, and they'll fill this space in, or maybe they won't, with new wax. So then they'll chew through these rubber bands and actually drag them outside. So that frame is going in my box. Now this colony has some active brood, so I want to make sure that I'm getting that brood into the frames here. This is a piece that technically, if I want this oriented properly, I got to make sure that I'm putting it in right, so it'll go in this way. This has some pollen, and it also has some honey in it. This right here is all capped honey. When the bees evaporate nectar down to the consistency of honey, once it reaches the proper consistency, they cap it over with honey, and that honey never goes bad. So again, I'll take my frame, rest it on the top. Oftentimes I'll square the edge off so I fit nicely into the corner of the frame. And this one I'm going to take the bottom and I'm going to cut that nice and square. They don't build nice and square in the wild unless they have a square space that they're using. So I'll take that excess comb, just set that to the side. And again, this one's a little bit heavier because it has that honey, so it's not quite sitting in there properly. So this one definitely needs rubber bands. Again, if you make these nice cuts with your comb, you don't have to go crazy with the rubber bands. But I'm going to do, extra rubber bands this time of year because the bees aren't going to be producing wax the same as they would in the spring or the summertime. And I have a little bit of space on the end of this. Maybe I'll see if I have a piece that I can fill that in, but as of right now, that's done. Fortunately, this is an older colony. It's not too old, but it's a few years, so this wax is nice and stiff. It's easy to work with. Brand new wax is almost white, and oftentimes difficult to put into frames. So oftentimes that new wax just unfortunately gets sacrificed to candle making or cosmetics wax making. Cosmetics meaning like lip balms or salves or something like that. So this, I had that piece that I cut off the top, and some of this I could probably cut and make fit into this frame because it has some capped honey in it, and I'd like to give the bees as much resources as possible that they had, and I can do that in this way by removing some of this comb and replacing it inside of this frame. Again, I have extra resources for these bees so they don't end up starving over the winter time. Honeybees do not hibernate, in case you didn't know. Again, I'm going to set that frame up. And you see I put that little piece in there that has some honey in it for them so they can use. So the important piece I'm looking for is the piece with the brood in it. And that is this piece right here. I'll pull my flashlight out so we can see inside of some of these frames. You know what, let me see. Let me put my light on here. Whoop. I had a new phone and it's a bit heavier than my original one, and it can tip over my tripod. So yeah, then there you can see that's developing larva. There's a bee on it tending to it. There's different stages of this larva. It's unlikely we're going to be able to see any eggs in here, although there might be some. They're difficult to spot in the camera. There is definitely some eggs in here. So this is probably the most important piece of comb that I have. Now I want to get this cut and into this frame so the bees can get back to it. This smell of this developing brood will help draw the bees into the box when I go to transport them. I'll show you my collection cage in a second. So we'll get that fit nice and tight in there. And we'll get a little piece in the corner to fill this frame out. This wasn't a huge colony of bees. There wasn't an enormous amount of them in it, but it was still a decent sized colony, and that little piece is going to fit nicely in there. The little holes in this piece of comb they use to just move throughout and back and forth from one side to the next. In a box they have space. It's designed to create space for them. We call it bee space. So again, that's my brood frame. I want to make sure that goes in the center of this box. Again, another nice piece. You can see it's the shape of the eave. This was the crown molding, this was the bottom of the eave, and this was the molding that rested against the side of the house. So this was a complete piece that fills that space up as much as possible. And they'll use as much of that space as they possibly can because they need to fill it with brood and with babies. Now in the summertime, all of this comb is going to be filled with developing bees. None of it's going to be, or very little of it will be used for honey storage. Almost all of it will be filled with developing bees. Normally they'll have honey across the top of this comb and down the sides, and all of the bees will be raised in the center of that. So we'll put a couple of rubber bands on this, and we'll get a little piece in the side here. What do I got? I'll try to get a piece with some nectar in it. Get a rubber band on that. And there we go. So now I have 5 full frames of that wax cut and banded. And I'll show you what that looks like. I have that cut and banded. So this is the cross section of what was inside of that eave that is now going to go into the box. I'll try to do this all at once in true dad style. Trying to carry groceries in. Try to have all the frames go in at once. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a couple of things. So here we have our queen. Not sure if you can see her in this cage. That's her right on your side there. That's the underside of her belly at the top of the clip there. She's considerably bigger than the others, although at this time of the year she slims down a little bit. She is different from the other bees. Got my hound dog sniffing around my bag of comb. Let's show you this lovely little lady here. We can show you to a worker bee. So that's our queen bee. Her back is bare. She doesn't have any fur like the other bees do. because she doesn't collect any resources. Like I was saying earlier in the video, she's a darker colored queen. You will see the bees have characteristics of her coloring. She has a stinger, but once she's mated, it's pretty much rendered unusable, so she can't sting me even if she wanted to. I'm going to put her back in this clip. She went in for me. So let's see if we can show you the difference in the queen at the bottom there, next to the worker. That worker just crawled out. The queen is too big to fit through these slots. The workers are not. That's why that worker slipped right out, and that's why we use these queen clips. You can probably see the difference in size there, although it's sometimes difficult to spot. That's my bee dog. Get out of here. Nosy bugger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the bees in my collection vacuum. This is the cage, which you're probably not going to be able to see the bees in this. They're all up at the top here. Maybe my flashlight will help. The bees are inside of this cage. This cage collects the bees so I can safely transport them. And I'm going to set the queen with that. So I also have, on top of this box, which we call the brood chamber, I'm having an additional box here. That's what we call a honey super, or just a super. And I have some additional honey frames. The contractors that that discovered the bees took all the honey from them. Fortunately, I have some capped honey frames that I'm able to give these bees. So I'm going to set a few of those in there. Each one of these frames holds maybe, I don't know, probably about 4 to 5 pounds, sometimes more. 4 to 5 pounds of honey in each one. I keep some of these frames around just because you never know. Sometimes I need them. Like for this instance, which these bees now have a full honey supply. So then this box will go to my roof, and we'll get these bees situated in them. So I'll show you what that looks like.